Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to today's GNet presentation entitled Leveraging SharePoint as Strategic Platform for Forms and Workflows. Without further delay, I'm pleased to hand the floor over to Anand Pandya from GNet Group. Anand, you have the floor.
Thank you, Marcy. I'd also like to thank everyone for attending the webcast today. Hoping you get a lot out of our topic and you can walk into your holiday weekend and New Year with some new things to think about. Just a little bit of overview of what we're going to be talking about today. I want to introduce GNet Group and introduce ourselves. We'll get into talking about today's business environment. I want to talk about some commonplace business processes in your organizations and those processes, how they should be streamlined and should empower workers rather than burying people in paperwork and email. From there, we want to take a look at Microsoft's application platform, specifically SharePoint, and how you can use its capabilities to cut through some of that red tape and minutia. We want to get into talking about automated forms and workflow solutions and how they can enable business-ready solutions. We want to do a small demo geared more towards the IT and developer folks in our audience today, showing them how easy it is to piece together a development of a form and a workflow. We want to talk about a business solution that GNet has created, specifically our planning and budgeting solution, which is an end-to-end planning, budgeting, forecasting package that's been built on the Microsoft platform, and it solves one of the most common, frustrating, and pretty much time-taking processes at most organizations. Throughout the presentation, we want you guys to ask questions via the live meeting console, as Marcy alluded to. We want to address some of the shorter questions as quickly as we can, but we will dedicate some time towards the end for Q&A. The second demo we'll be doing is going to be on our planning and budgeting solution, and that's going to be more towards our business-centric folks who want to show the practical application of the Microsoft application platform. I want to introduce myself. My name is Anand Pandya. I'm the service manager for GNet Group in our South Central District, involved in guiding and architecting our projects in the South, as well as working with the folks up north on our internal projects and constant development. Our other speaker today is Chaitanya, who you'll hear from in a few minutes. Chaitanya is GNet Group's senior SharePoint architect, and as we like to call him, our all-around miracle worker. A little about forgot we had a poll. So we want to get a feel for who's in our audience today, and we want to take a look at your current role in your company. So if you could take a moment, click the radio button that best corresponds to your role. You got finance, sales and marketing, IT, executive management, other, or if you'd like to abstain, hey, that's your right. Take a little bit of time here. Okay, I think that's pretty much everybody. So a little bit about GNet Group. GNet Group's a managed gold-certified Microsoft partner focusing on empowering data-driven strategies. The way we see it, data is the lifeblood of any company in operation today. If you can't make sense of your data that your business processes are creating, you're most likely having a hard time operating against your strategy. Through our history, over 150 successful Microsoft business intelligence and SharePoint solutions, we've helped companies in multiple verticals turn their data from mere zeros and ones to actionable insight. We've been leveraged by Microsoft's Global Center of Excellence and are recognized as a thought leader and a leading provider of BI and SharePoint solutions. We're headquartered in St. Paul, Minnesota, and we have a local office in Dallas, Texas. GNet Group offers a core range of services across business intelligence and SharePoint. All our projects begin at the strategic level, where we help our customers envision how they can better monitor and achieve their goals and objectives, help establish data and content governance to start all our projects off on the right foot, and ensure that the solutions we implement are used to the fullest rather than proverbially collecting dust on a shelf. We have 3 pre-built solutions to act as accelerators for business insight. For those of you in the healthcare field, our healthcare intelligence framework helps provider organizations better manage the balance of quality of care with the cost of providing it. Our digital marketing dashboard framework helps marketing departments in any organization of any size involved in digital marketing to better understand how effective their campaigns are and how to measure that oh-so-hard-to-measure return on marketing investment. And as we alluded to earlier, we offer an end-to-end planning budgeting solution, and we're going to get into a little bit more detail on that later in the hour. enough about us, though. Let's talk about the topic at hand. You know, the topic of our webcast is really centered about leveraging SharePoint and automating forms and workflow. What that really means is we're talking about streamlining business processes. I want to take a moment and think about some of the processes you guys have in your organizations. You know, think about HR onboarding. How many forms did you fill out? How many forms have you had to prove when people came aboard under your team? Are they paper forms? Are they email forms? Think about some of that. We had some pretty heavy attendance from IT folks. Think about it from the processes you need to undertake when you want to make changes in a production system. Do you have a change control committee? Do you need to submit forms and code requests to do code reviews? How long does that process take? How manually intensive is that process? How smart is the workflow for approval queues? When I want to submit a PTO request to my boss, how long does that process take if he's not in the office? Who gets that? Is the workflow smart enough? I mean, we could roll through example after example of just different ways that processes just are not streamlined and they're not efficient. And, you know, as we're going through that, you might even be thinking, all right, so what? You know, it's everybody's problem, and that's just kind of the cross to bear. And, you know, and I just, you know, you grin, you bear it, you put your head down, and you get through the process. And, you know, it's a fair point. But if you actually sit and think about some of the pains that inefficient processes cause, it's kind of mind-blowing. You know, how much time is wasted filling out manual forms, you know, validating the data in those forms. You know, in the case of pen to paper, you know, transposing those forms into a system of some kind. Are they manual handoffs? Do you have a submission process? Is somebody taking a form that you fill out, taking it to somebody else's, you know, office and just leaving it on their desk with a Post-it note? You know, that's just the forms themselves. We talked about how data is the lifeblood of any organization. What about the quality of that data? You want it to be the best it could be. So the more inefficient a process, the higher the window is to have bad data. You know, how valid is that data of an inefficient manual process? Are we looking at duplicates? Are they fat finger errors from transposition? You know, it's that idea of, well, I guess this is right, and I don't want to stall the process, so I'll just put something down and hope it's right. You know, and when you do submit that, what kind of visibility do you have in the process? How many times has something stalled or bottlenecked, and it's impossible to find out why or where? You know, we like to call this the, I'm checking on it, and I'll get back to you principle. You know, how many times have forms just kind of gotten lost in the shuffle and gone to what I affectionately like to call form graveyard? I want to dive a little bit deeper into a specific example that we're going to go a little bit into further, and that's the planning and budgeting example. Now, most likely, a lot of you just wrapped up this process past month or so, walking into next year, and I'm hoping I'm not bringing up any bad memories. But when we're talking about planning budgeting with our customers, most often we hear these terms like spread marks, or yes, we have a couple of Excel wizards or Excel Jedis, or our planning process is really just an Excel hell. And it's a way of customers telling us that right now all their planning and budgeting data is housed in this plethora of spreadsheets across people's inboxes, shared drives, desktops, and only one or two people really know how to make the data work together, what spreadsheets are valid, which has the right format, you know, what of the proper variables I need to have in my VLOOKUP functionality. And from a workflow perspective, you know, how many times have you just set up a folder and a set of rules in Outlook just for planning and budgeting? And it makes sense maybe from an organization perspective, but really when you get down to it, a lot of the times these rules are just, I'm using that to get rid of clutter. And there's so much back and forth on version this, and this was edited by so-and-so and reviewed by another person. This is the final copy, followed by another email that says, actually use this one. And inevitably people just say, I have a folder and rules to get rid of this stuff from my inbox, and I'm actually waiting for an email directly to me telling me to do something. So think about your own process. You know, Jack Welch has this famous quote about the budgeting process, and really what he's trying to say is that when planning and budgeting for the next year, that should really be one of the most exciting times for a company, because you're planning about all the things you will be doing next year, all the great things your organization could be doing. But inevitably, the process is so disjointed, so time-consuming and cost-consuming that it sucks all that energy and time and fun and the dreams out of that. You know, it's inevitably this was based on assumptions that were wrong. I don't really have a lot of insight. I have to run 20 different reports to get somewhere. You know, I have this, queue that I run through, and I just kind of check things off because, oh goodness, planning and budgeting, here we go again. And this is one of the classic examples of a process in every organization has to go through that is inevitably suffering because inefficient forms and the workflow itself. But, you know, we don't want to dwell too much on the negative. So let's talk about the solutions. And I want to bring in Chaitanya to tell more about Microsoft, SharePoint, and the Microsoft application platform and how it can really solve some of these problems. So, Chaitanya?
Thanks, Anand, and good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to go over this part of the SharePoint wheel, as I like to call it, and it shows us a bunch of options and a bunch of features that SharePoint Server offers as an application platform. Now, what you see is sites, communities, content, insights, composites, and a search that runs across all these areas. For the purposes of our demo, we are going to focus only on the composites part of it today, and specifically, not the whole yet, and specifically the InfoPath forms and workflows. Now, these areas for the forms and the workflows is what Anand referred to in his earlier slide, and these are the pieces that would help do a single point of truth and an automated workflow process rather than having to use email as a workflow tool. Now, I wanted to do a quick poll before we go any further and talk more about what the forms and the workflows do. So we'll switch to that real quick. Now, basically, this is just to understand what version of SharePoint everybody is working on. And while the poll is happening, I also wanted to point out that in your top left, top right corner, you do have an icon that looks like 3 pages, which is basically content you can download. We do have this presentation available for download. Okay, and it looks like there's quite a few people using SharePoint 2010 and 2007. Now, the SharePoint server itself is based on a Microsoft application platform, which basically looks like this cube. And the whole point is all the data sits in this database layer, and all the users are right up here where you see the PC, phone, and the browser right there. Now, the challenge is if there is data in the database layer and you have a user who's using a browser, you do need the application layer to be able to talk to the data. Now, this is served through the web interface using the SharePoint forms and workflows, which is based on the SharePoint server. I wanted to also take a minute to talk about what is it that the forms do. And I'm thinking a whole bunch of people here may have already worked with InfoPath forms, but I wanted to talk about the 2010 version of InfoPath. And what it is basically 2 parts. So one is a designer, the other is a filler, which lets you fill forms and design forms. And the designer itself can then be restricted to say, not everybody can go and modify my form templates. The forms themselves are form templates, which then gets published to a SharePoint server. It also gets published as a content type and then gets attached to a workflow. And we'll see that in a little bit when I get into the demo. Now, these InfoPath forms can get data from the SharePoint server using a direct connection to SQL Server, or they could use web services, or you could use business connectivity services, or there could be any other web services that anybody has chosen to write on their own. So without further delay, let's jump into the actual demo, where I want to show how we create an InfoPath form, how we create a quick SharePoint workflow. I do want to point out that these forms and workflows are extremely basic, and there is much to be done. There is no other handling that we'll do in the forms right now. we do have all that in the application. That is what Anand is going to demonstrate in a little bit. So I'm guessing everybody can see my screen, and I have the InfoPad Designer open here. As you can see, I have a couple of options to create forms. I can create a SharePoint list, I can create a SharePoint library, I can create an email form, I can create a blank form, or I could use advanced options to connect to a web service or a database. With InfoPad 2010, you can also connect to the SharePoint server and create to InfoPad 2007 forms, which is right here. For the purposes of our demo, we will just create a blank form and say design. Now, if you observed, the screen changed, and now I do have a ribbon here, which is similar to the Office interface. So it's really easy for everybody to use just to get started on InfoPad. So let's give our form a title. And then we can add controls to the form. Now to do that, I can just click here, click a control. As you can see, it should be opening up on your screens right now, and I can pick any control I want. So we will just put a text box here. And if I double click on the control, I get to see properties for that particular control, which is my text box. And I can actually type anything inside it. And I will say this is a text box. And InfoPad is smart enough to figure out that I did not qualify this as a text. So I will do that. Say OK, and then save. Also, I'm feeling like I would add a button to this form. So we'll do that. And change the name of it. And then for this particular button, I can choose what I want to do with it. I could just have rules attached to it. So I can say what happens when I click on the button. And the action I want to do is close the form. Once that's done, I could also write code for custom code. For anybody in the audience who's a developer, you could basically just write custom code. I can save the template. And I basically will get a Visual Studio-like interface where I can actually write my custom code. We are not going to do that right now. So I will close this. And then back to the form, let's preview the form and see what it looks like. There you have it. That's the form. And then if I click on the button, the preview closes. Now, if this were not a preview and if this form were on the SharePoint server directly, it would close the form just like an application. And we'll see that in a little bit. Now, once the form is done and you deploy the form to the SharePoint server, the next step is to add a workflow to the form, which we'll do through the SharePoint Designer. And we'll give it a second here. So, for the SharePoint Designer, this is the SharePoint Designer 2010, which is connected to the SharePoint server. I can have a multitude of workflows. It could be a site workflow, it could be a reusable workflow, or I could do a list workflow, which is basically attached to a list. The reusable workflows and the site workflows are something similar to what you already have out of the box, which is basically approval workflows and things like those. We will go ahead and create a list workflow and attach it to an announcements list and call this new announcement. Now in this workflow, I could have a number of conditions that start the workflow and what it does. So I can say, do this when this happens, and it's all English language, so it's very easy to do. For the purposes of our demo, we'll just do an action, which is send an email. What we'll do is we'll send Anand an email once an announcement is posted to the announcements list. So I'll click here. Like you see, this is just like the Outlook interface where you do a create email. In the to item, I will select send an email to Anand, say okay. Create a new announcement, and in the email, I want to say back, and maybe I can just go look up that particular announcement and include what it says in the announcement itself. So that's done. I can save my workflow. Then I want to change my workflow settings and say, start this particular workflow when an item gets created, when a new announcement is created. So I need to save after checking this box, I need to save the workflow again. And then I'll publish the workflow to the SharePoint site. Once it's done with the publishing process, I can just go to the announcement site and create a new announcement. And then I say save, and I have my new announcement created. Now Anand should be getting an email real quick here. And that ends our demo, so I'm going to switch back and let Anand talk about the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Chaitanya. I can tell you that my phone just buzzed at me, so I did just get the email. So thanks for that. Now don't just start posting announcements and, flooding my inbox. So we saw how easy it was to start developing forms and workflows and how, thanks to the Microsoft application platform, it isn't a monumental effort to start fixing your problem today. But when we get into the more complex problems, like our planning and budgeting solution, the planning and budgeting example we talked about before, it takes a little bit more effort. And that's where GNet Group's planning and budgeting solution on the Microsoft platform can easily be deployed in your organization to help do just that. So we've worked with one of our customers, the Amherst H. Wilder Foundation in Minnesota, to publish a case study with Microsoft on the solution. If you download the deck available, as we pointed out in the top right corner, you can. There's a link towards the back of this deck where you can read the case study itself. The Wilder Foundation seeks to help at-risk children, families, and seniors through community programs. So given the imbalance in the economy the past couple of years and decreased contributions and revenue, fewer resources forced Wilder to take a closer look at how their costs were impacting the bottom line and how, during their granular budgeting process, the analysts and the managers responsible for forecasting, planning, and budgeting could really avoid losing the forest in the trees. So their existing budgeting tool was really failing to meet those complex needs and growing needs, and these managers and analysts were spending hours on really low-value activities, and this should sound familiar from earlier, data consolidation, data reconciliation, ad hoc report creation, best guess analysis, shifting paperwork around and sending emails around and figuring out the right versions to use. All the pains we were talking about earlier in the hour. Creating a fiscal year budget for them required almost 3 months of entering and manipulating data, not planning and analyzing and really getting excited about next year's activities, but just going through the minutia of entering, manipulating, running reports, checking to make sure things are okay, then entering and manipulating, and so on and so forth. The GNet Group planning and budgeting solution helped turn that ship around for them. The solution allows customers to allocate budget by department, allow those department managers and analysts to input plan and budget data through their browser and perform a real-time analysis to best manage those budgets without having to go to a bunch of different places and find spreadsheets and find documents. If I have to dig up narratives and dig up last year's depreciation on capital assets and things of that nature, by reinforcing best practices in business intelligence, we were able to enable a true single source of truth for all planning and budgeting activity. Users were able to see the impact of their decisions by running real-time reports and having access to real-time data. The critical business rules that ran the Wilder Foundation were able to be integrated into the solution. So to maintain their custom business rules and their custom process integrity, as well so as to not require an entire department to attend training on a whole new platform. The experience was made to be browser-based, using tools they already understood how to use, ultimately reducing the effort for the annual budget creation. Taking a deeper look at the architecture, I want to bring Chaitanya back in because he was actually the architect for the Wilder solution. I want him to kind of walk through this diagram here and walking through the solution, how all these pieces work together, and kind of remind you that Microsoft App Plat Cube we were looking at, and really how it helped drive the solution to ultimately exceed Wilder's goals and expectations. Chaitanya?
Thanks, Anand. So for this architecture, for this particular solution, we basically had three different areas. One was all the source systems that would be feeding data inside the database system or the budgeting database. The second was the budgeting database itself and the reporting pieces for that. And the third was the front-end application and what people could access and interact with. So for the budget source systems, there were multiple systems. These could be HR systems, these could be finance systems, these could be Excel spreadsheets, or these could be any other systems. These were then, the data from these systems was taken and put inside a budgeting database. Now this particular budgeting database is on SQL Server 2008 platform. This database serves as the main repository for all the budgeting data. To manipulate data in this database and to work with it and to be able to add and search data inside this database, we built InfoPath forms on top. This was essentially the user interface that let people work with the data in the database. Now, once the data was being worked with and once people had put in their inputs and numbers and everything that went with the data, obviously everybody wanted to see what effect did that have. So we had some reporting services reports. These were SQL Server reporting services reports, and those allowed people to see their changes in real time as to when a change was made and you hit the submit button, how does it change my numbers? How does it change my budget? That's what they got. The other thing that happened from that data was a data mart and a SQL Server analysis services cube. What this let everybody do was, through the dashboards, which were built on performance point services within SharePoint Server, take an analytical view of data as to how did my budget change year over year? How did we improve? What is the trending? Were we able to reduce our spending? Were we able to improve our quality of services that are offered? Now, there could be n number of metrics here in terms of what each organization needs to measure, and those could then show up as dashboards in terms of reports or trends or analytical charts. I also wanted to take a minute here to answer a question that came in. I'm not sure if this was already answered. The question basically was, can we use InfoPath to build applications instead of ASP.NET? I just wanted to point out, like in the demo I showed very good write custom code. This building InfoPath applications basically reduces your time that is required for development, and if required, there is an option of writing the same C# or Visual Basic code that you would write in an ASP.NET application. So to answer that question at a very high level, InfoPath gives you a lot of features that are already built in and on the SharePoint platform as well, which reduces your development time as opposed to the conventional development approach. And I would like to hand it over to Anand, who is going to show you how the application looks like.
Indeed. Let's go ahead and jump right into the planning and budgeting solution. So you should be able to see a pretty standard SharePoint project team site. If you see some scroll bars that are not on the screen that I'm specifically controlling, then you can go ahead and hit F5 to get into full screen mode. So what you can see here is the stepping stone for the planning and budgeting solution. It's a basic SharePoint team site. The planning and budgeting as a process is most often, or more often than not, a team activity. And it made sense to take advantage of the collaborative capabilities of SharePoint to host the application within a team project site. You can see there's libraries to hold documents, subsites to support individual needs for organization. So we took not only the forms and workflow part of the solution, but combined it with some of the enterprise content management principles and some of our upfront SharePoint planning, deployment, governance to really make it an all-encompassing solution for the full experience. So if we're looking through these links, you see there's the application itself, which launches the main planning and budgeting solution and its corresponding modules. You have a set of administration forms in an effort to really empower the information worker and the business worker. The administration of the planning and budgeting solution is managed in the same interface of the app itself. So, for example, I can manage my chart of accounts and alter, descriptions of GL codes here. I can manage business rules and job codes here. I can manage user access and user security, not just from a user can or cannot access the system, but what specific modules a user can access. So it's setting up role-based security within the application itself. And really, I can do all these things as a member of the business team without relying on IT to do it for me, but I'm not violating any of IT's policies or standards. So it really empowers the business user. So let's go ahead and launch the application. Go ahead and maximize that. From the outset, you can see some of the controls that Chaitanya was showing in InfoPath. We have a text box in the top right corner. Relies on integrated security of SharePoint and the Active Directory to recognize who the user is logging into the system and welcome them. So in this case, I have logged in, so it's welcoming me. In the middle, the drop-down box tied back to that SQL budget database that shows the user what scenarios they're allowed to select and interact with. So in this case, the security is only allowing me to have access to those modules that I have access to, in which case the two scenarios I'm allowed to see are last year and this coming year's planned budget. So this is all tied back in to an integrated security model that we referenced in the administration set. You can see we were able to add an image here, add a title, and we were able to add these action buttons that ultimately launched the child modules. Capital items module allows us to manage capital assets. The employee expenses module allows us to maintain detailed employee expense breakdowns. So this is really a per employee breakdown of the fully burdened cost to the organization, which allows them to really get granular, but at the same time maintain that idea of not just losing the forest and the trees, but keeping an eye on the forest while tending to the trees. And then the other module here is the revenue expense module, which is the full roll-up of the chart of expense accounts by department. So if we're jumping into the capital item form, we can see another InfoPath form set up to allow the user to enter, edit, and interact with capital items for their department. You can see the security is still maintaining the same integration, and a label that dynamically refreshes to remind me again which scenario I'm working with. This is just another example of InfoPath programmatically talking back to the SQL Server database and maintaining the active session that I've been working. If you really want to get that technical piece, it's trading those data points back and forth. From the user's perspective, it's a seamless experience. I don't have to dig up another set of spreadsheets or ask somebody for their spreadsheets and figure out what's going on. I have drop-down boxes that allow me to access the departments that I am allowed to access, so we'll select Children's Mental Health Services Site 1. See, the endowment use change, so this is an example of the InfoPath forms interacting with the back-end database that allows me to allocate a set amount of my budget for each department. Depending on which department I use, I can keep an eye on my full budget so I know that as I'm editing or creating items, I can see their effect on the larger budget. So I can see which capital assets I plan on purchasing next year. I can see the asset classes with which they belong to, those depreciable life, and the amount that is going to cost, how that hits across the fiscal years 1 and 2. Is it in my asset management system? I can see the depreciation that I'm carrying over from the prior year. I can hit edit, and you see by clicking edit, the action tells the form to only highlight the fields that I can interact with. So if I wanted to specify which user was getting this, I could say that Chaitanya is getting this, and this is actually going to be a Tag 5 asset class. Immediately, you can see the form is interacting with the business rules, with the database to determine that when I selected asset class 5, it changed the depreciable life. You can see the fiscal cost changed, as well as the endowment use total, or in this case, the full budget that I can use. If I wanted to change the amount, let's say it's only going to cost me $1,500, I can do that, and when I hit submit, you can see that little popped up said it was working with the system, the fiscal cost changed for the years, I got this operation completed successfully. So here I was able to edit and change capital items without having to deal with a whole ream of spreadsheets, and I was able to keep an eye on my total budget use as well. I can run reports from here that allow me to show that depreciation by department. Moving on to the revenue expense form. We spoke that this module is kind of the roll-up of my full chart of expense accounts. You see, it's the same user interface, so from a training perspective, I don't have to learn a whole bunch of new modules. It's really the same familiar interface when it comes to knowing where I'm working, who I am, what I'm allowed to see, what scenarios I'm in, which department I'm in. We can go back to Children's Mental Health Services Site 1. You can see that endowment use is now carried over, so it's not as though I have to wait for a bunch of systems to work through themselves to get the new endowment use after somebody was working with capital items. I get the most recent up-to-date values. I can interact with my full chart of accounts here. I can select that same single version of the truth. I'm interacting with the same set of data. I don't have to worry about versioned spreadsheets. I don't have to worry about wondering which system I need to go to for this. All the information is at my fingertips, pre-aggregated, and ready to go. So in this case, we can select, let's look at the software maintenance expenses. So what this allows me to do, I can enter my budget for next year. I can see what I budgeted the prior 2 years, as well as I can enter an estimate for what I think would hit in the current calendar year. Allows me to see variances, allow me to see the spread over the 12-month fiscal year that I have. In this case, this is a July to June. System is robust and configurable enough to really handle whatever fiscal year you might be running. As well, narratives are readily available to me in the same form and in the same set of data. So one more time, I don't have to worry about trying to monitor a little red dot on a spreadsheet that I think could either be a smudge on my screen, or this is a call out to a comment, or I don't have another set of documents that tells me about narratives that pertain to a certain account. Here we can house them in a single form in a single application. So I can hit edit again. You can see that it's highlighting the fields that I can edit. So if I wanted to change this to maybe 15,000, I could do so. And maybe instead of quarterly, I want this to be, let's go ahead and make it even distribution. So when I do that, and I click submit, sends data to the server, and you can see immediately what it's done. It refactored that budget, changed my variances, redid my distribution, and ultimately changed the endowment use available to me. This was all done affecting my business rules that I've created in the system. One-stop shopping, right? I don't have to do Excel gymnastics. I don't have to copy and paste formulas. I don't have to hope that if I make one change to this cell right here, it's going to break 7 other spreadsheets that are linked to mine. So that's an example of just how this planning and budgeting solution built across all these InfoPath forms is really streamlining this process and allowing analysts to be analysts. So if we're looking at, say, the employee expense module, it allows the analyst to, again, view individual employees and see how those fully burdened costs really affect that organization's bottom line. It allows you to see that full cost broken down by category. It allows me to take employees and allocate them across multiple departments. So in the case of organizations that have multiple sites, if you're working on maybe Site 1 3 days a week, Site 2 2 days a week, you want to allocate that appropriately. The system allows you to do that without having to figure out whole bunch of complex calculations or, again, manage one person across several spreadsheets. Same thing, if I have salary changes through the year, it's very easy for me to make those changes within the system and factor them back down. One of the things that also pertains to this is security. We mentioned that it's within the business users to control security and delegate security in the system, and it goes beyond just saying user can or cannot access the system. Obviously, getting into employee expenses, there's a bit of sensitivity around it. The system is smart enough to be secure to let folks know that this person can or cannot access specific modules. So again, the security is ultimately integrated back into the solution. From a workflow perspective, we've defined in our organization that when a new employee is added to the planning and budgeting system, an email should go to their manager and let them know, we've added this person to the system, you need to approve this. So I'm not just randomly adding people. So let's go ahead and add a new employee to our system. You can see, again, by clicking edit, clicking new or clicking edit, it highlights the fields that I can edit. So let's go ahead and just using my keyboard, tabbing across. I don't have to use my mouse. I can just kind of hit the arrow down key and just scroll through codes, or if I know who I am, we'll say I'm a data analyst. Immediately affects the job code, applies the right GL code. Let's say my next review date. I can go to today. I can jump forward, and it'll be at the end of March. Say I was hired on the 20th. Will call me a full-time employee. And let's say I'm not eligible with health insurance right now, so I don't have to fill that out. If I wanted to, I could automatically select just myself. It's because my wife has a fantastic health plan. And for dental, we'll select single as well. And you can see, as I select those, the fully burdened cost automatically is affected here. When I hit submit, the data gets sent back to my budget database. It gets stored in the system, and you can see that it ultimately affects the endowment use available to me. What's also happening is an email is being sent with the new employee ID to the manager of that department to basically say, testing department number 2's manager, a new person has been added, please approve. Lo and behold, new user has been added to the system, please go and approve. So you can see how the system works with each other to ultimately drive that through. This is a system that can be fully integrated, so if you are a Lawson HR organization, this could be integrated with Lawson to accept feeds to, again, streamline the process rather than lead to more redundant work. So that was just kind of a quick glimpse into our planning and budgeting solution. There's more to it. We alluded to. Let me see if I can get back to our presentation here. There's a full BI component to it where we have reports and dashboards. We want to go ahead and take the time for a poll here while I'm talking through some of the other elements of our solution. There was reporting available. As you saw, they were ready to link reports as pertinent to the forms that you were on, as well as a dashboard that allows you to track the real-time analytics of the tool itself. So are you currently utilizing an automated forms and workflow solution? Yes, no. I'm not sure, or I'm interested in learning more about it, so please contact you. Basically, this is, are you sitting in, this kind of rapid spreadsheet set that we've been talking about, or are you starting to utilize more of these SharePoint-able solutions? So future directions of our tool. GNet Group is always working to enhance our solutions and making them better for our customers. We're always moving to take advantage of new technologies and new capabilities to make these solutions much more business ready. The next version of our planning and budgeting solution is due out at the end of Q1 of 2011. It's going to take a much deeper advantage of the new capabilities in SharePoint 2010 and SQL Server 2008 R2. It's going to have much more richer interfaces built on the InfoPath 2010 set. We want to showcase more modules, deeper integrated workflow capabilities. as we continue to improve beyond that, we want to have future versions of the solution to include enhancements on the configuration of business rules, more complex business rules, the ability to create models for your organization. So if you're in a, if you need a consolidation model, you need composite models, things of that nature. We want to have that ability ready at your fingertips in the next releases of this solution, as well as enhancing the solution itself by taking advantage of the technology capabilities. GNet's also committed to harnessing the power of the cloud. So if you're not already, everywhere you turn seeing the To the Cloud commercials, that's us. We want to take this planning and budgeting solution and make it available in the cloud for our customers who really want the power of the solution, but don't necessarily have internal resources to support full on-premise deployments. Sharing the concepts of Microsoft's Azure platform and the online productivity suites, GNet Group works with Microsoft as cloud partners to offer our customers flexible, powerful solutions that allow really on-demand solutions to scale up and scale down as our customers need. So one last poll here. We want to know, are you currently utilizing a planning and budgeting solution in your organization? You are, you're not. When we say you're not, you're really looking at, Excel, maybe Access, Outlook. If you are, that's great. We'd love to hear more about it. I think we've got most everybody's input on that. So we talked about a lot of different things, and we want to provide you with a couple of links to really help do some more research on your own. As we said, you download this deck directly from the live meeting, and you can go ahead and read our Wilder case study, get more insight on how this planning and budgeting solution is currently helping Wilder streamline their organization and really better plan for future years of continuing to help the Minnesota community. You can visit our blog on WordPress for constant updates on our solutions, our offerings, tips and tricks on the Microsoft platform, as well as industry news from our industry experts. And for more information on the Microsoft tools themselves, you visit the Microsoft SharePoint website, the Office InfoPath website, or learn more about the Microsoft Cloud. And at this point, I think we want to go ahead and open the floor for some question and answers. Please feel free to use the Q&A window, which I think several of you have been using throughout the organization, throughout the presentation, I'm sorry. Please feel free to submit questions at this point. We'll just kind of take them as they come. I think we've got a couple in the queue. So we've got one in the queue right now. What happens to all the, just the window fell away. So, sorry, we're walking through the set of questions. If you pull up your QA window, you can see some of the Q&A that's been going on throughout the presentation. If you haven't got any questions you can think of off the top of your head, by all means, please feel free to contact us. There's my email address, Chaitanya's email address. You can reach me on Twitter. You can always send messages to GNet's Twitter account, and those can be answered by any of our solution experts. For those of you who can't see that window, we just got a couple questions. Will the information transfer to SharePoint 2007? InfoPath services and workflows do apply to both 2007 and 2010. There are some new features available and some new UIs available in InfoPath 2010 that you can harness. We talked about using InfoPath forms to create web apps in lieu of ASP.NET. You can build those robust web applications in a fraction of the time, and they work together. The application for nonprofit businesses only, no. It is not. The example we had was based on the Wilder Foundation, which was, of course, a nonprofit, so a lot of the things you saw, such as endowment usage and whatnot, may have been pertinent to nonprofits, but the planning and budgeting solution itself it is robust enough to be implemented in any kind of organization, in any industry. Is the planning and budgeting application available as a ready-made, pre-built app, or does it need to be customized and developed? The solution's pre-built, so the core of the solution, the forms, the interaction of the forms, the deployment routines, that is all pre-built. The pieces that we can configure for you are meant to be, the application of, first of all, training, how to use that, as well as any kind of configuring of color schemes, skin standards, business rules that might need to be put into the tool. If there are really specific, very specific, customized needs that can't be done by the solution, we can definitely work with you for a much more customized implementation. We can always train you to do it or do it for you. And then the final, we had a much more technical question.
So I can take those, Anand.
Right.
I think we answered one question about how does the ASP.NET and the MVVM patterns and all that stuff. I think it's available for everybody to read. Yes, it should be there. So the one part, and then there's another question that's come in. I would say what we can do is where you're deploying SharePoint, Infopath forms to SharePoint, there's quite a bit of a process to it in terms of, it depends on what it is that you're trying to achieve. So I would say, if you can send us an email, there's Anand's email ID and my email ID in there. If you can send us an email with a little description of all the points you're looking for, we'd be happy to answer. There's another question about when would you use cubes, if I understand the question correctly. It is related to the SQL Server Analysis Services cubes, and I think if that's how I understand it. The whole logic behind the cubes is basically to have analytical data to do a year-over-year analysis. I'm hoping that answers the questions. If not, please feel free to send us an email with any other questions as well.
Yeah, I think the cubing component is really meant to support, if you remember that architecture slide, it's meant to support kind of the BI side of planning and budgeting. So you have this wealth of data over several years that you've been interacting with. Cubes obviously going to allow that pre-aggregation and analysis of that data via dashboards and ad hoc reporting. Okay, so I think we've gotten to most of the questions, or all the questions. So, as we said, if you do have any other questions that do pop up, please feel free to grab the deck from Live Meeting. Our email addresses are there, as well as Twitter accounts if you're active. Please feel free to reach out to us with any questions you have. We'd love to answer them for you. As well, please, thank you for attending today. And please feel free to follow GNet for, as we said, constant updates to our solutions, tips and tricks for the Microsoft platform, industry news, and general goings-on. We have our blog that you can follow us there, our Twitter account, LinkedIn, Facebook, all your traditional social media platforms, as well as our website. So, again, we want to thank everybody for attending. We really appreciate you dedicating your time on this holiday week walk-in, and we hope you have a great holiday and a great new year, and we hope to hear from you soon. Thank you.